Hello, James. How you
Hello,
doing?
Rafa. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now we're going to introduce James a little bit for the audience over here. The strategist of I mainly from Brazil, but James was luckily my boss when I moved to the UK to work for Isobar, and I have the luck to work with James. But I will let James first of all tell a bit about his career and the highlight points and the role that he's doing right now with APG and consultancies.
Well, nice to see you, Rafa. And it was indeed a lovely time that we worked together. It's about 10 years ago now, I think, I sort of, which is quite shocking. I've spent most of my agency career working in media agencies. Although I have, as you know, worked in creative agencies. I was head of strategy at Isobar. I've kind of worked in other places. I've also done some kind of consulting and work client side as well. But I guess from a sort of the strand of strategy that I'm most familiar with is communications planning, which is, I guess, sort of media planning plus, and trying to kind of get help clients think strategically about the when and the where and the how brands show up, as well as what they say. So I've been doing that for 20 years. I've worked in London. I've also, about 10 years ago, I left London and moved to a smaller city in the UK called Bristol and worked in a few sort of smaller agencies, digital, CRM, that sort of thing. Um, I also lately have done quite a bit of training. So I work with the APG, who hopefully some of your audience will know. And I do kind of the comms planning and media planning modules in some of their kind of in their prestigious kind of modular training sessions. I've also devised my own training course called Nailing Your Strategy, which is sort of more about the, I suppose, ways of thinking, how to go beyond frameworks, how to bring people with you when you're developing your strategy, how to use all of yourself, and also sometimes how to get out of your own way. But sometimes we are our own worst enemies. So I sort of do training on getting started, but also running workshops, how to write more persuasive presentations, that sort of thing. So yeah, that's me. I suppose I've done an awful lot. I've done, I've worked on all sort of categories. I've done quite a bit of government work, which is quite sort of a specific kind of, it's not there's a specific kind of strategy, but it has a certain sort of has certain demands about it. And because it's rare to be working in strategy when you're not trying to sell people things, you're trying to change behavior and do it from a place of without wanting to make a profit. So yeah, that's me in probably too long. Sorry, but does that make sense?
No, it's awesome to hear you. And APG is the account planning group. And here in Brazil, we have Grupo de Planejamento, which is similar to account
Okay.
planning to APG over there. So it's trainings that he gives on APG and also on his profile as well. And what about the essence? What keeps still, like you mentioned, the frameworks. So let's say the framework, the end adaptation of the frameworks, not to be strict to the framework, but also thinking about the adaptation that you can make. Which frameworks are still working and what has changed in the last 5, 6 years that I haven't been in an agency working as a strategist? So what has changed in the last
Yeah.
5, 6 years?
So what can you expect if you start coming back into agencies? So that's the
Yes.
question. I suppose, excuse me. I think there's an awful lot of stuff that will feel familiar to you, Rafa. There's a lot of ways of thinking that are kind of the same. There's at the same time, we know advertising as an industry is very fixated on what's new, what's next, how one thing is dead and something else is going to take over. And it's I'm sure we'll get onto this, but I'm starting to sort of, having lived through a cycle of, social media is going to change everything and TV is dead, and now and then into a world of, notwithstanding all the kind of smaller things like NFTs or whatever it might be. Now we're in a world of artificial intelligence and how that's going to change everything, and all the old ways are dead. There's always an excitement about new tools, new tactics, and it always should be about where is the attention of our audience. You know, how are they behaving? What are the patterns of attention? What are the patterns of behavior around a technology, a category? There are certain first principles, I guess, then that sort of we need to stick to. And if we throw them out, I think that's to our detriment. And I think sometimes we don't always look as serious as we might do when we get really obsessed about the next shiny thing. In fact, I'm working with a client at the moment who sort of acknowledges that their own challenge they have internally is a sort of obsession with the next shiny thing. You know, they want some innovation in the plan. They want to know what they're doing that's different to what they've done before. But what they don't have necessarily is a strategy that's really well defined, that they can build on cumulatively through following and expanding and deepening each year, and also that they can learn from through measurement and evaluation and then reapply those learnings. So I think, you know, that's not casting any shade on that client. I just think there is a sort of behavioral problem sometimes around the world of marketing and advertising, and it's not everywhere, but there is this sort of dancing around and trying to find the next kind of best thing. What stays true, I think, and it's not necessarily about whether there are certain frameworks that I find useful. It's more those first principles of, you know, a problem well defined is absolutely critical to helping you kind of come up with a solution that will actually, you know, be effective. Making that definition and that solution as simply expressed as you possibly can. Thinking about how you coordinate all of the actions you're doing off the back of that strategy so that they are joined up. Those are sort of perennial challenges, and those things sound simple and might sound boring to some people who've been doing it for a long, long time, or that it's always looked that way. But simple is also quite hard. And that's arguably why strategy remains really, really important, you know, to kind of carve out a really simply expressed course of action for a brand, for an organization, or even just for an advertising campaign. You know, it's quite hard. It's quite hard to do. And it's really hard to do sometimes when the kind of, I suppose, the structure that's built up around the way that we do what we do makes that difficult. So lots of agencies doing different things, perhaps, you know, making it difficult to kind of coordinate and centralize that effort. The short-termism that's sometimes placed on people about results and how quickly we need to show business effects when actually minds are changed over a long, long period of time. So, you know, all of those things that probably, you know, you were dealing with 10 years ago when we worked together, or, you know, 6 years, are still there, right? They're still as hard to do and as important to do as they ever were. You know, some of the fads have fallen away, new fads are in. I'm not dismissing them as being fads. They are part of what you do. But being able to step back from all that and go, what is the thing we're trying to achieve and how are we achieving it? And how do some of those things contribute to that work? You know, that's still the job.
Usually on the business problem is to sell more. That's what we want to do. But then you gotta go to the definition of the problem and the issue and what communications can do, right? On that. And usually go to the consumer insight first. So of course, first check the problem and define what it is, just as you mentioned, but then to grab a consumer insight. And I used 10 years ago to do a lot of desk research. Eventually, when you have the budget from the client to do qualitative research, usually got a lot from Cara ahead of time, from the media aspects of the data, Ipsos or other points. So what would you recommend for me to get the better consumer insights? And I've read about the 4 Cs, about the culture insight, the company insight, and the category insight. What would you say is the best way to grab that? And how would you define insight, the word insight?
Oh gosh, I mean, yeah,
A lot of questions. Sorry.
yeah, a lot of questions. Yeah, maybe what is an insight is not going to be a particularly fruitful sort of place for discussion, Rafa, because it's, you know, there's plenty of that going on in our discourse everywhere else. I always remember, you made me think, you know, just thinking about you and I working together, and there was a fantastic strategist that we both worked for, essentially, Pat McDonald, who is still at Dentsu Creative and is, you know, one of the brightest people I've ever worked with. And she always used to sort of say to us and to me, that a business problem is just a behavior change in disguise. And, you know, yes, category insight, yes, kind of commercial or company insight, but often it's the magic comes when those two things kind of come together. I remember she would talk about, you know, you see this sort of come to life a lot in FMCG, and it's how it forces you to sort of articulate a business problem in a really well-defined way, like I was trying to describe. You know, it might be, yeah, she would, I think there was one thing talking about a butter brand. I think it was Lurpak, and there's a sort of commercial target or a penetration target that brand had, and breaking it down into, you know, the way that that butter was used, the different uses to which it was put in the home, how often it was bought, distilling it down into, we want people to kind of buy one more pack a week, and to do that, get them to bake a cake, right? So you're kind of creating more usage occasions and dramatizing them and making that feel appealing and connecting that to a purchase cycle, but also a kind of how that ladders up to a, you know, a longer term commercial target. Sainsbury's is a supermarket in the UK, which I don't know how many of your viewers will know, but they had a very, very sort of famous and effective campaign in the UK a few years ago called "Try Something New Today," and there's brilliant work from the advertising agency that worked on that, AMV, that took the kind of big commercial target for the entire year, and I forget the numbers of how many millions increase in sort of in revenue it was, and worked out through maths, you know, how many shoppers sort of came in the store, how many different individual shopping trips there were, breaking that down into a, you know, a revenue per week, and actually a revenue increase per shopping trip. And then alongside that, seeing from kind of client data that most people, because we are all creatures of habit, kind of do the same shop each time. We sort of go to the same spots and the same shelving units and the same aisles. We're trying to sort of get through things efficiently without too much cognitive effort. So we are on automatic. We're going through it as a routine. And actually, to get to something like £1.12 extra per shopping trip, that huge annual target sort of could be broken down into, what if you encouraged consumers to try something new today? So get out of their routine and just buy one more thing. And that to me is a fantastic example of how you use client data, behavioral insight about the way that people behave, often without thinking, and what kind of intervention you want to make. Not yet even how you make it or even how you say it, right? Which is kind of where you get into creative strategy or advertising strategy or media strategy. Just saying that's what we're going to aim for. And it's almost like it's the sort of the smallest denomination of a behavior that's possible, but connected directly into a huge commercial target. And it's that kind of thing that I think aiming for that level of, you know, reconciliation, I suppose, between all of those worlds is the kind of thing to aim for. How you get to it these days, Rafa, is perhaps more difficult because that data's always been there and we've got more data than ever. The question is, how do you join dots between different data fields? How do you pick apart the signal from the noise? How do you choose to ignore 90% of it in order to focus on the thing that's going to really make a difference? So oftentimes your problem is not to do with access to data, unless it's sensitive, unless clients aren't willing to give you stuff, or it's about being able to find the right kind of data, the most valuable stuff. At a media agency side, you often get sort of, there's a slight obsession with click-through rates and impressions and, you know, sort of metrics that are really at the kind of the tactical end of what's happened. And you can still infer useful things from that, but you've got to step back and see it in the context of people's behavior, why they do what they do. It's still fascinating to me that we might obsess over getting a click-through rate up from 0.12 to 0.18%, but we're forgetting that there's that still leaves 98% of people who aren't clicking. And what's the value there? So it's just that ability to think and look and pick a perspective alongside access to all of the data that you might be able to get.
how do you think about the comms planning after grabbing the behavior of the consumers and the media aspects in terms of which channels are they doing, but what will be the key point from the comms planning? And a creative strategist could do that, because here in Brazil, the media and the creative agency are the same. So
Right.
what could be done in your perspective? What is done, of course, from the comms
I
planning?
suppose it depends what, yeah, I suppose it depends at what level you need to do it, right? So, I mean, something like category entry points as a way of thinking is really interesting. The who, the when, the what, the where, the how, the what, the why of how people are entering the category is really, really helpful. Someone shared with me a couple of years ago, and I always use it because it's the easiest way of describing it, which I really like, and it might appeal to parents who other parents, as I know you are, Rafa and I. There's a time when your kids are young when you might be having birthday parties, right, for them, and I think about a brand like Coca-Cola and the different category entry points that are available to use that product. And it might be getting the Coca-Cola in for your kid's birthday party. It might be the getting the drink in as the mixer for the drink you need at the end of it. And it might also be the kind of the drink, the kind of the hangover cure you need in the morning, right? Three very, very different uses of the same product. Being able to think a bit about what that framing is for people, where the growth is, where the surprising story is. That's one way of sort of starting to think a bit behaviorally about how you look at, uplift in sales or whatever it might be. There's of course other ways of thinking about it and starting to think more about customer journeys more broadly. People going through, when and where is the product most relevant or useful? Which customer journey, which journeys through life does it actually kind of fit into? Is it always a customer journey up to purchase, or is it actually a sort of big, life stage journey that kind of people are kind of really thinking about? So, a lot of comms planning, I think, is about mapping to find out where the problem is right now, right? So I think, I sort of use behavioral models because I've been working on government quite a lot. I use a lot of behavioral models. In government circles, there's one called COM-B, which is behavior as a function of capability times opportunity times motivation. BJ Fogg in America from Stanford does a similar thing, but he calls it BMAP, which is behavior is a function of motivation, attitude, and prompt. Being able to sort of using that as a lens on the behavior that you want. So going back to the Sainsbury's example, if your behavior is buy one more thing that you haven't bought before in a shop, you then look at that situation and go, well, what are people's capability? That might be financial, that might be the time they have, it might be opportunity. How often do they go in? How well is something presented to them in the store? But it might also be motivation, which is like, how quickly am I trying to get through this? How open am I? And misdiagnosing a problem as being a motivation problem when it's actually a capability problem is really dangerous. Not dangerous, that's not, it's a misdiagnosis, and that's potentially quite risky, right? So actually being able to move through those spaces and go, are we trying to dial up people's motivation for something? Are we trying to increase their sense of capability for something? Or is it just at the moment there's no opportunity to do something, so do we need to carve those open? And media is great at carving open opportunities by creating the space for behavior, either online or in experiential or wherever it might be, or driving a response, whatever it might be. So those are sort of some of the things that I think about when I think about behavioral and analyzing behavior as start points for where a strategy might flow from.
You mentioned the consumer journey. So like building the persona, what's the best way to build a persona and the consumer journey? Thinking about the awareness, and thinking about not only the full funnel, but what's the best way to build a consumer journey? And should I build a persona for the consumer journey before that, or how does it work?
Yeah, this is really interesting, because I think this is going back to your first question about how have things changed and what's going on in agencies. I think the function of planning or strategy or whatever you want to call it has been around for sort of 50 years or so now. And so you've got this blend of proprietary frameworks that work really well for individual agencies, but also lots of modes of thinking, lots of understanding about cognition and how decision making works. And not to mention, because of all the data that we've been talking about that's often generated digitally and so much more. So I guess the reason I'm saying that is because there'll be lots of people with a very fixed view on the right order or the right sequence in which to do things. I'm probably not one of those people. I like, there's a because you often inherit briefs where some of that's in place, but it's wrong, or some of it's in place and it's kind of sacrosanct and you can't change it and the client really likes it, or there's briefs coming in where a client doesn't have any of that, and you sort of need to kind of build it all up over time. So I suppose I'm less purist about it and maybe more pragmatic. You just do what you need to do to get to an answer. From a purchase journey point of view or customer journey point of view, I suppose one of my favorites that I've worked with is when I've worked at as I said, media agencies, and Wavemaker, who are obviously one of the biggest sort of global agencies. I worked in their London office before they were called Wavemaker, actually, but and subsequently, and they've got a lovely kind of thought about things really being a cycle, not a funnel. So we're always moving in and out of kind of category or through category cycles. Either we're pre in market, we're in market and sort of interested, we're at the point of buying, or we're post buying, and we sort of come again out again. And most advertising, most people are out of most markets most of the time, right? So advertising at scale in a broadcast way is really focusing on people being in market for there to be a reference point when you kind of do come into market, and to create that shortcut for a quicker decision. That's kind of what it is. I suppose it's interesting that all the kind of lots of the development is being around getting closer to the purchase and trying to be as close as you possibly can, which I think underplays an awful lot about what communications and marketing and advertising can do and what it's really, really good at. Sorry, this is not answering your question, but I think that kind of thinking about, I suppose when I'm thinking about models or journeys or funnels or whatever it might be, trying to resist the tendency to get as close to instinctively feel you have to be as close to the decision as possible, and that's the only thing you can do, because it's about framing what your job is. If your job is to sort of raise awareness or see a step change in kind of opinions, or create the conditions for different kind of decisions, or or perspectives on things, then you're not going to see that in a behavior, necessarily a purchase. So whatever you do and in whatever order you do it in, as long as your measurement is in line with what you're trying to achieve, and your strategy is sort of is congruent with that, then it's okay. Personas, audience definitions. I have a sort of, I like thinking about people. I think we all like thinking about people. I think we've got a sort of structural challenge with that when we try to capture people on one PowerPoint slide saying everyone in this group is like this. You can think differently about the way you organize people and the way you categorize them for you. There's different modes of behavior. There's different sorts of missions that people are on for purchases. There's different moods any of us are in during times of the day or days of the week. Being a bit more imaginative about the way that we categorize and group people, I think would be a really good thing for us as an industry. I think segmentation is the illusion of sometimes of organization. So all of these things, I suppose, are useful, but they're to be used with care.
Oh, my friend, it's awesome to hear you again.
I hope this makes sense. I've got a horrible feeling I'm not answering any of your questions. I'm just barking off on rants. So sorry to everybody.
You are. It reminds me when I have the briefs from Kellogg's, for example, and I was bringing to you to ask, what do you think about this and what should we do here? So it's amazing to hear you again. And from my perspective, I used to, well, for 2 years, I believe, the last 2 years that I worked at Meta, the thing that I most presented to the agencies, because I was a creative agency partner, a partner of creative agencies, lecturing them on a lot of things, bringing benchmarks to the core clients that we have defined. This is the core client. So let's think about the evolution of this client and the assets of Meta. So I was bringing benchmarks, insights, and lectures about different things. The assets and on other things, the creative effectiveness. But the one that I presented the most was about diversity, equity, and inclusion in advertising. So
Right.
I was talking about the lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we have less than 1% of LGBTQ plus on the ads, 4,000 ads evaluated, less than 1% of people with physical deficiency, less than 0.3%, and a lot of other things. So what do you think about the role of the planners to bring that? Because that usually people think about, oh, the creative didn't thought about that, haven't thought about that. So what the strategists could do? I keep thinking about the culture insight. Is that something that you can bring to the table to be done? And I keep thinking about the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. If that could be the part of the problem of the client as well, not only profit, but people and planet as well, depending on the purpose of the brand and the purpose of the company.
It's a very, it's a rich area for discussion, and really, really critical for us as an industry, as communities, as humanity, as a species. I should say anything that I'm about to say, should be, I should acknowledge that I am male, white, straight, middle-aged. Therefore, I am not necessarily. On one hand, I'm not on one hand, I'm not the best person to speak about this stuff. On the other hand, I'm exactly the sort of person who should be speaking on and thinking about this stuff, because, I'm the one, and I represent the type of people who have the platform, who have the privilege, and need to be handing some of that over. I think the industry has come on in leaps and bounds thinking about this stuff. I think there is a danger if the only thing we think we have to do is improve representation in advertising. Put more people who are visibly non-white, non-male, non-straight, so on and so forth, into non-able, not non-able, but disabled, into assets. That's the superficial cosmetic thing. That's not to say that representation isn't important. It's really, really important that representation gets better. You're seeing in media agencies, I think, in the last 2 or 3 years, especially in this country, in the UK, thinking about what are called diverse audiences as part of the sort of planning process, which is to say, baking into their tools and systems ways of recognizing and identifying opportunities with audiences that we might feel are more marginal or marginalized. That's brilliant, because I think it starts to, on one hand, this thing starts to get solved when we're thinking less about people that need representation and more about them as, commercial opportunities. There's audiences that we underserve, and if we serve them better, we might make more money from them because they've got money to spend. That's, most crudely, that's the opportunity. But it means at least we're sort of seeing everybody the same, in the sense that they all have, opportunities. That from a planning and strategy point of view, working out how to play in those spaces, how to do that credibly, how to do that authentically, how to do that in a non-patronizing, non-condescending way is really, really difficult, but also really, really hard to get. Also important that we get right. I've been working with an agency for the last couple of years that really sort of gets this, thinking about the kind of the tools and the systems, but also working with partners who can speak to assumptions that we might make about where and when to show up to find those audiences. What's the opportunity to be in mainstream channels relevant to diverse audiences, and when do you find the media moments and the community areas of community where people gather and congregate, and your brand shows up there in a way that kind of stays true to the brand but also is meaningful to those audiences. So I think we're getting better at it. We're getting better at it because we're talking about it. There's always a risk of being token about when you're doing it. We're ticking the diversity box with our audiences and our kind of work. So I think that's going to continue to be a dialogue. But as long as we're getting beyond the world of pure representation, I mean, that's just in the output. I mean, before we get to the issues within the industry about recruitment, around a seat at the table and inclusion at higher levels of the business, how are you going? What does that mean for remote working, distributed working? What does that mean for office hours? What does it mean for us as a service industry who are always running to keep up when it comes to client deadlines, because there's always too much to do and too little time, and that pressure comes down in the pyramid of agencies to put the pressure on the more junior people. If then what you're doing is bringing in people who can take that pressure, and not necessarily supporting them for some of those kind of challenges that people might experience through disability or through lack of inclusion or a sense that they don't belong, that's creating more of a problem. So it's very interconnected with lots of other issues. Again, I'm rambling. I'm sorry. Does this make any sense? But these are some of the things that I think we need to crack as an industry. More mindful, less tokenistic, but also work harder to do it really well.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic to hear. But yeah, you mentioned representation, but there is another number, I forgot, it's 82% or 92% that Black people, when they are present, is without representation. They're just there on the background of the films or the content. So there's a lot of lack of representation over there and a lot of stereotypes. Recently, we have more women driving cars on the ads, because before 5 years ago, the only men were driving cars. And things around that. Man is the money maker. Elderly people are very weak, and things around that.
Yeah, it's really important. I think I suspect we're better at it than that in the UK. I don't know. I think there's been a bit of a step change in representation, which I think is really good. But it's the same with anything, right? The stages of representation are, like you say, stereotype, then tokenism. Then when it's like looking at sort of female characters in movies and saying when they're allowed to be as bad and as nasty and as anti-heroes like men, then we'll have reached some level of equity, right? Where's the female Don Draper? Where's the female Walter White? Men are allowed to be bad and having sort of existential crises. Women are still less so, right? So I'm being generalizing there. That's but just as with that in drama and with characters and in fiction, and that acceptance that there isn't a way to be insert marginalized group here, then that's where we need to get to with our thinking as well.
Oh, my friend, thanks a lot for having this conversation over here, recording it. For me, it helps me a lot. I would love to have more conversations with you about that, about recycling my abilities and sharpen them for the next season that I hope to be on an agency. And we have the last 3 minutes over here, but I'd love to hear from you. What do you thought about this conversation?
It was great. Thank you, Rafa. Thanks for asking me these questions. I feel like you probably had a lot more questions and I spoke for far too long with each question. I'm so sorry. But these are the big questions, definitely. How are we thinking? How are we reflecting the kind of societal changes we all see happening around us? How are we managing uncertainty? How are we sort of structuring our solutions such that they really deliver for clients in the real world, not just frameworks that look nice and give us the illusion of structure and organization and meaning? So it's been brilliant to think about them. Thank you very much. It's been lovely speaking to you as well. Or sorry, you've been listening to me and I've been speaking at you, and I'm really we should probably do that again a different way next time. And I hope this goes well for you, Rafa, and I hope that that I'm sure someone will snap you up very soon. So it's been really lovely to do. Thank you.
It's going very, very, very well. It was amazing to hear you. Thanks a lot, James.